fly so high. I can fly twice as high. Take a look. It's in a book. Reading Rainbow. Take a look.
Yeah.
It's in that book. It's Reading Rainbow. So continuing where we left off last class, Smith has found himself in the Ministry of Love. Parsons actually has just found himself as well in the Ministry of Love. And Parsons believes his daughter turned him in for yelling "down with Big Brother" in his sleep. Parsons has an upset stomach and has terrible diarrhea in the cell. And Winston tries to cover his face and he gets yelled at by the telescreen. And now they're both sitting in this very disgusting smelling cell together. Parsons was removed. More prisoners came and went mysteriously. One, a woman, was consigned to room 101, and Winston noticed, seemed to shrivel and turn a different color when she heard the words. A time came when if it had been morning when he was brought there, it would have been afternoon, or if it had been afternoon, then it would have been midnight. There were 6 prisoners in the cell, men and women. All sat very still. Opposite Winston there sat a man with a chinless, toothy face exactly like that of some large, harmless rodent. His fat, mottled cheeks were so pouched at the bottom that it was difficult not to believe that he had little stores of food tucked away there. His pale gray eyes flitted timorously from face to face and turned quickly away again when he caught anyone's eye. So Winston has been in this cell for such a long time now that he can't tell the difference of time of day, and he can only tell, how long it may have been between intervals, but he has no real recollection of what time it is or how long he's been there. And now he's describing this person who has a chinless, kind of big toothed face that has really pouchy, big dragging kind of cheeks. The door opened and another prisoner was brought in, whose appearance sent a momentary chill through Winston. He was a commonplace, mean-looking man who might have been an engineer or technician of some kind. But what was startling was the emaciation of his face. It was like a skull. Because of its thinness, the mouth and eyes looked disproportionately large, and the eyes seemed filled with a murderous, unappeasable hatred of somebody or something. So now walks in this man who Orwell uses the word emaciated, which typically means someone who's starving or underfed. So this person walks in who just has this mean look on his face, and he's just really skinny and gaunt. The man sat down on the bench at a little distance from Winston. Winston did not look at him again, but the tormented skull-like face was as vivid in his mind as though it had been straight in front of his eyes. Suddenly, he realized what was the matter. The man was dying of starvation. So if you're on your questions for the reading guide, it says, why might it have shook Winston so much to see the man starving to death? I mean, what do you think? Why would that be something so shocking to Winston? Imagine where Winston grew up. He's been a party member pretty much his whole adult life. He's always had food, whether it was good or bad. And in the last however long he's been with Julia, a year or so, he's been eating really good food, right? And he's been around the proles a lot, and they're not starving. So he probably hasn't seen someone starve to death in a very long time, since he was a child. The same thought seemed to occur almost simultaneously to everyone in the cell. There was a very faint stirring all the way around the bench. The eyes of the chinless man kept flitting toward the skull-faced man, and then turning guiltily away, then being dragged back by an irresistible attraction. Presently he began to fidget on his seat, and at last he stood up, waddled clumsily across the cell, dug down into the pocket of his overalls, and with an abashed air held out a grimy piece of bread to the skull-faced man. So at this point, everyone in the cell is really uncomfortable because this guy just walked in who looks like he's about to die from being starved to death. And the chubby-cheeked guy that first had come in digs into his pocket and tries to offer him some bread. There was a furious, deafening roar from the telescreen, and the chinless man jumped in his tracks. The skull-faced man had quickly thrust his hands back behind his back as though demonstrating to all the world that he had refused the gift. So here's this chubby kind of faced guy, who they're calling the chinless man, is trying to hand the starving man a piece of bread, and the starving man just makes this over-ridiculous gesture to try and, move his hand away, I would have never taken it anyway. "Bumsteed!" roared the voice. 2713 Bumsteed J! Let fall that piece of bread! The chinless man dropped the piece of bread on the floor. "Remain standing where you are," said the voice. "Face the door. Make no movement." The chinless man obeyed, so the chubby guy is just like dropped the food and now he's just standing there like, oh shoot. The door clanged open, and as the young officer entered and stepped aside, there emerged from behind him a short, stumpy guard with enormous arms and shoulders. He took his stand opposite the chinless man, and then, at a signal from the officer, let free a frightful blow, with all his weight of his body behind it, full in the chinless man's mouth. The force of it seemed almost to knock him clear of the floor. His body was flung across the cell and fetched up against the base of the lavatory seat, and for a moment he lay as though stunned, with dark blood oozing from his mouth and nose. A very faint whimpering, or squeaking which seemed unconscious, came out of him, and then he rolled over and raised himself unsteadily on his hands and knees amid a stream of blood and saliva. The two halves of dental plate fell out of his mouth. So the chubby guy drops the bread, and he's standing there, and these two guards walk in, and one of the guards, waiting for the other to give him the signal, just like punches this guy as hard as he can in the face. Blood is just pouring out of his mouth and his nose. He has these two dental bridges, which are like fake teeth, that just fell out of his mouth on the floor. And at this point, he's just kind of like sitting there stunned. The prisoners sat very still, their hands crossed on their knees. The chinless man climbed back onto his place. Down one side of his face, the flesh was darkening. His mouth had swollen into a shapeless cherry-colored mass with a black hole in the middle of it. From time to time, a little blood dripped onto the breast of his overalls. His gray eyes still flitted from face to face, more guiltily than ever, as though he was trying to discover how much the others despised him for his humiliation. So now that he is back to sitting where he was, he's incredibly embarrassed and just ashamed of himself for even offering the guy a piece of bread, because now he he just got completely beat up by this guard with one punch to the mouth. And now he's just embarrassed by it, and he's looking around at everyone like, is everyone else feeling as awkward as I am? The door opened, and with a small gesture, the officer indicated the skull-faced man, so the one that didn't take the bread. Room 101, he said. There was a gasp and a flurry at Winston's side, and the man had actually flung himself onto his knees on the floor with his hands clasped together. Comrade! Officer! He cried. You don't have to take me to that place. Haven't I told you everything already? What else is it you want to know? There's nothing I wouldn't confess, nothing. Just tell me what it is, and I'll confess it straight off. Write it down, and I'll sign it, anything. Not room 101. Room 101, said the officer. The man's face, already pale, turned a color Winston would not have believed possible. It was definitely, unmistakably, a shade of green. Do anything to me, he yelled. You've been starving me for weeks. Finish it off and let me die. Shoot me. Hang me. Sentence me to 25 years. Is there somebody else you want me to give away? Just say who it is, and I'll tell you anything you want. I don't care who it is or what you do to them. I've got a wife and 3 children. The biggest of them isn't even 6 years old. You can take the whole lot of them and cut their throats in front of me, and I'll stand by and watch it, but not room 101. So the skull-faced guy who didn't take the bread has been starving to death on officers' orders, and now they come in to take him to room 101 as if he did something wrong, even though he didn't take the bread. And at this point, he's offering very clearly 2 distinct things. So your question is asking you, what are the 2 things he offers? And if I were to reread it, it says, is there somebody you want me to give away? Just say who, and I'll name them. So basically, he's like, tell me who you want me to blame for something, even if they didn't do it, and I will blame them. And the other thing he offers is his whole family. He offers his 3 young children and his wife. He says, go to them. Slit their throats in front of me. I don't care. But anything but room 101. The man looked frantically around at the other prisoners, as though with some idea that he could put another victim in his own place. His eyes settled on the smashed face of the chinless man, and he flung out a lame arm. That's the one you ought to be taking, not me, he shouted. You didn't hear what he was saying after they bashed his face? Give me a chance, and I'll tell you every word of it. He's the one that's against the party, not me. The guard stepped forward, and the man's voice rose to a shriek. You didn't hear him, he repeated. Something went wrong with the telescreen. He's the one you want. Take him, not me. That poor guy who offered him the bread, my God, all he did was try and offer this starving man some bread, and now this starving man is trying to throw him under the bus as if he did something wrong. The 2 sturdy guards had stooped to take him by the arms, but just at this moment he flung himself across the floor of the cell and grabbed one of the iron legs that supported the bench. He had set up a wordless howling like an animal. The guards took hold of him to wrench him loose, but he clung on with astonishing strength. For perhaps 20 seconds they were hauling at him. The prisoners sat quiet, their hands crossed on their knees, looking straight in front of them. The howling stopped. The man had no breath left for anything except hanging on, and then there, with a different kind of cry, a kick from the guard's boot had broken the fingers of one of his hands, and they dragged him to his feet. "Room 101, said the officer. The man was led out, walking unsteadily, with head sunken, nursing his crushed hand, all the fight gone out of him. So the skull guy, who's now getting dragged off to room 101, is trying to hold on to the leg of an iron chair, and they just stomp on his fingers and crush his entire hand, so he has to let go, and now he's getting dragged off. A long time passed. If it had been midnight when the skull-faced man was taken away, it was morning. If morning, it was afternoon. Winston was alone, and had been alone for hours. The pain of sitting on the narrow bench was such that often he got up and walked about, unreproved by the telescreen. The piece of bread still lay where the chinless man had dropped it. At the beginning, it needed hard effort not to look at, but presently hunger gave way to thirst. His mouth was sticky and evil-tasting. So basically, I don't know if you guys remember, but in the first part when we read this, in this distance learning way, there's a section where he talks about how all he's been dreaming about is a piece of bread. Of those 6 things that he can't stop thinking about, one of them is a piece of bread. And now there's literally this piece of bread on the ground that he knows if he touches that bread, they're going to come in and do something horrible to him. So now he's just being tortured even more by looking at this piece of bread sitting on the floor that he can't touch. The humming sound and the unvarying white light induced a sort of faintness, an empty feeling inside his head. He would get up because the ache in his bones was no longer bearable, and then he would sit down again, almost at once, because he was too dizzy to make sure of staying on his feet. Whenever his physical sensations were a little under control, the terror returned. Sometimes with a fading hope he thought of O'Brien and the razor blade. It was thinkable that the razor blade might arrive concealed in his food, if he were ever fed. More dimly he thought of Julia. Somewhere or other she was suffering, perhaps far worse than he. She might be screaming with pain at this moment, and he thought, if I could save Julia by doubling my own pain, would I do it? Yes, I would. But that was merely an intellectual decision, taken because he knew that it ought to be taken. I love that line. It makes me think that here he is being starved to death as well, and he's afraid to die. Winston's afraid to die. He doesn't want to die, which is why the razor blade is kind of useless to him, because he doesn't think he has the strength to even kill himself with it. But the thought that maybe O'Brien would save him, or O'Brien would send it to him, the thought that there's any hope is what he's kind of clinging on to. And then he has this moment of thought about Julia. Julia's probably being tortured as well as he is, and now he's sitting here thinking, is it possible that if it meant that she could be safe, would I double my own pain? And then he says, yes, I would, but that was merely an intellectual decision taken because he knew that he ought to take it. So if it's a decision that he feels that he has to agree with, do you think he really agrees with it? Do you think that he in his deepest self understands that if Julia was really being tortured and it was up to him to save her, would he do it? Would he take her pain, or would he let her have pain? So I think he's having this moment of I said this thing, but do I really mean this thing? He did not feel it. In this place you could not feel anything except pain and the foreknowledge of pain. Besides, was it possible when you were actually suffering it to wish for any reason whatever that your own pain should increase? But that question was not answerable yet. So he's grappling with this idea of, would he actually take her pain if it meant that he'd have more pain? The boots were approaching again, and the door opened. O'Brien came in. Winston started to his feet. The shock of the sight had driven all caution out of him, and for the first time in many years he forgot the presence of the telescreen. They've got you too? He cried. They got me a long time ago, said O'Brien with a mild, almost regretful irony. He stepped aside, and from behind him there emerged a broad-chested guard with a long black truncheon in his hand. You remember what a truncheon is, right? It's a nightstick, like a police officer's nightstick. You knew this, Winston, said O'Brien. Don't deceive yourself. You did know it. You've always known it. Yes, he saw now. He had always known it. But there was no time to think of that. All he had eyes for was the truncheon in the guard's hand. It might fall anywhere, on the crown, on the tip of the ear, on the upper arm, on the elbow. The elbow. He had slumped to his knees, almost paralyzed, clasping the stricken elbow with his other hand. Everything had exploded into yellow light. Inconceivable that one blow could cause such pain. The light cleared, and he could see the other two looking down at him. The guard was laughing at his contortions. One question at any rate was answered. Never, for any reason on earth, could you wish for an increase of pain. Of pain you could wish only one thing, that it would stop. Nothing in the world was so bad as physical pain. In the face of pain, there are no heroes, no heroes, he thought over and over as he writhed on the floor, clutching uselessly at his disabled left arm. Dang. So, to recap, here's Winston sitting in a cell, starving, miserable, seeing all these people terrified about going to room 101 that he doesn't even know what the horrors of that room hold yet. And he's like praying that O'Brien would send him the razor blade so he could even have the choice to set himself free from this prison that he's found himself. And finally, O'Brien walks in and he thinks, oh my god, he's here to save me. But really, O'Brien has been a part of the party the entire time. Because, like O'Brien says, they've got me a long time ago. So, those of you who guessed that O'Brien was not honest, dang, you guys were right. O'Brien has been a party member the entire time, through and through. The Brotherhood maybe doesn't even exist at this point. And poor Winston is just looking at the truncheon the whole time thinking, oh my god, they're going to hit me with that thing. And where is it going to land? And they end up breaking his arm by hitting him on the elbow with it. And in that one moment of pain, Winston realizes that he would never take Julia's pain for his own. He's like either too selfish or he's in so much pain and misery that he just couldn't imagine offering himself more pain to save her. So, the end of chapter 1.